Hey Matthew, it's me again. Hello. And now we're on to the final exam. Welcome. So, the two most substantive important things that I have learned throughout this chapter is A, the Bobby Harrell cycle of socialization, which was part of chapter 4 in this case, and as well as chapter 3, the social construct of race. Both of those, I think, were absolutely fundamental, the most important things I have learned from this class, as both of those tie into essentially really everything we learned from there on out. So, starting with socialization here, I want to note that I do have the chart up here. So, starting off, the chart talks about, the first arrow of it talks about a child, not even a child, a person being born into the world. A person is born into the world without, but however, that world is, it has things in place. It has mechanics in place in this case, such as biases or stereotypes. And then from there, that child is then taught by the parents values, roles, and rules that were ultimately taught to them. However, this then is reinforced by institutions such as laws like lawyers, police officers, which will then ultimately result in discrimination. And then from this discrimination then results in things such as ignorance, anger, and silence. Like, for example, if we take a agent and target group, which is what in this case the participation was talking about. So we have an Asian who's a white boy, we have a black boy who is the target. So we take the white boy. The white boy is born in 1952 in Mississippi. He is born into a world of bias and stereotypes. His parents then raise him to not like blacks and that they're inferior. This is then reinforced in the law with Jim Crow laws such as segregated schools, which then instills in him privilege. Ultimately, this results in him being ignorant and promoting the status quo, starting the cycle all over. Then, take a black boy at the same time. He is born into a world of stereotypes and biases. However, his parents raised him to be afraid of whites and to never do anything that they would see as a threat. This then is reinforced through culture, as stories were passed on down of what happened to blacks who didn't listen. This, again, ultimately stigmatizes speaking out, which results in anger and silence. Silence in him, in this case. You can even say an example of this of the 20th century would be Rosa Parks. Rosa Parks, who didn't want to move. She ultimately got fed up and was angry. She was silenced. Her people were silenced about the bus, and so she didn't move. But as well as those, there's also other contributors, as I said earlier, that tie into this particular chapter as well. Things such as our lecture from chapter 5. In this case, it was ignorance and wealth. So ignorance and wealth distribution, I should say, is ultimately a really great example of the first arrow of the cycle, as it shows that we only can learn so much from our parents, especially if they don't know. In this case, most want to think that things are equal, as that's what they were raised to think, and so they ultimately they're raised to think like this without ever questioning it, and so they promote the status quo, and so they don't learn the truth. Then you have chapter 3 coming on in, which then reinforces the second arrow of this chart, as it has the idea of discrimination. Discrimination in this case by institutions. For example, a good idea of a discrimination by an institution is Jim Crow laws. Jim Crow laws that were prevalent down in the South. These laws were put in place, okay, to reinforce the idea of racism that was already taught. Okay, it was already in the world. It was part of the bias that was already in the world, but it was just further exemplified through the laws instead. Okay, instead of through actions. And the last point of socialization that ties into another chapter is chapter 14 in this case. Actually, one of the quotes here, it is from Grace Lee Broggs. It says, "You cannot change any society unless you take responsibility for it, unless you see yourself belonging to it and responsible for changing for it." Now, this is a great example of the last arrow, okay, which is actions. The quote says, "If you don't do anything at all, then nothing will ever change." Now, that last arrow particularly focuses on actions and results. So, if you are angry or disenfranchised, then what are you going to do about it? That's the action, okay? And so, essentially, it's only if you take responsibility, okay, take responsibility, and to interrupt the cycle, can you make a change. So instead of making a hard left, to continue that cycle of socialization and being ignorant and having fear, if you take a hard a hard left, then you will be able to make a change. And the second point that I want to note here is the point of race as a social construct. Okay, now this one was part of chapter 3 in this case. Now, race as a social construct is definitely prevalent throughout the United States now, but its ultimate purpose was, it was created to enforce I should say, by white elites in the U.S. through laws and culture, okay, primarily to divide and conquer, conquer the labor force, make them compliant. And so the creation of race then divides people, so that way the white elite, I should say, are able to stay in power. Such as in chapter 3, it states here, the first laws banning social interaction between races were passed after labor strikes of black and white workers, as their conditions were very similar. So the white elites came up with an idea that if they create race, now they can essentially legally discriminate against black people. Discriminate against black people because the whites were essentially shuttered out from the bad stuff that black people had to suffer. And a good points that tie into this is really from the very beginning, from the foundations, okay? Like things such as chapter 6, the Constitution, okay? Quotes from John Jay, which say the people who own the country should govern it, and as well as from James Madison, who said the purpose of government is to protect the minority of opulence, wealthy, against the majority, which in this case was the general public. Now, those two combined, those two quotes, truly dig into the mind of the true reason of the creation of race in the beginning. Why do they even need to think of it? Well, they were trying to keep themselves wealthy, keep themselves alive. And when you have you cannot keep your power if a large group is able to overthrow you. That will not happen. And so they created it from the very beginning. This also ties into chapter 7, okay, which in this case, the purpose of law. What is the purpose of law? The purpose of law is to reflect and enforce conformity to society's values. In this case, most of it is heavily reliant on white elites' values, okay, in which their values was to keep power, okay, which also ties into chapter 2. What is the definition of power? The ability to make others do what you want them to through various means. So, these 3 chapters, 6, 7, and 2, really all concern power, which is the ultimate reason why race was created as a social construct. As if it was just put in there, eventually people would catch on and they would band together and overthrow them. So they had to create a way to make it look like things are okay, but they're really not. They're really not, because they made things way worse off for black people than they did the poor whites. They still made the poor whites stuff bad, but not enough to make the poor black and poor white lives seem similar, okay? And so that finishes question 1 in this case. Now from there, we have question 2. Now, me personally, I absolutely liked the structure of this class, okay, as it was structured as a lecture, text, then reading guide, quiz, and then participation. I really would not want this to change, to be honest, because to me it's nice and organized. Because you do the lecture, the lecture video, which I'm very thankful that it's in a video and not reading. You do the lecture to get an overview, to really give you insight, warm you up to what you're learning. Then you read the text, then you do a reading guide on that text to kind of understand it. And then you take the quiz. And then from all the stuff you just learned, you then take it to participation. You then do one of the participation assignments. And so ultimately, I liked it how it was structured well, especially the due dates, because it tells you on there when it's due. For the most part, you only have 2 chapters due every week. Would not want that to increase anymore, okay? And then things such as coursework, I ultimately did like the readings. However, the only thing I would say that needs to change with the readings is that I feel as though it should have audio in this case, because for me, I have ADHD, so like sitting there reading a 40-page chapter or 37-page chapter, which I believe was chapter 6 about the Constitution, or chapter 8 about the Congress, it's kind of hard for me. So I want like something more opulent, more engaging for me, and if not reading, then maybe a animation video as well, okay? And so the course material that we had learned, for me, I think the most fundamental engaging was class discussions. As you can see, I talk a lot. That is very prevalent in all of my discussion videos that I have made. And so I like discussions mostly because we learned all this stuff, and then I get to hear how everybody else is feeling. Because me, I'm a type of person, I like to hear both sides. I want to hear yours, because there's always 2 sides of a story. And so reading it, I then can assess, agree or disagree with people, and we can make a conversation. Because like I said, I'm one who likes to conversate. So to me, that class discussion is really what brings me joy, really, about this class. And as far as improvements are concerned, I probably would say the readings are cool. I kind of just wish we had like a kind of like an animation thing that we can like follow, something similar, just to make the reading a little bit more engaging. Like I said, audio will work in this case, um, but it's to me it's fine. It's just for me because I have a hard time sitting there. I'm not for sure how everybody else in the class feels, but for me, it was just a tad bit hard sitting there. Now, as far as evaluating myself, I do again examine my grades as you've seen, because I care about my grade quite a bit. Because 89% is not cool with me. I'm sorry, that's just not gonna work. And even a 90, I'm like, you need to try your best. And so ultimately, I have a 95 and A, which I think is my truly reflecting my level of work, if I'm being honest. Because I'm like, I wouldn't have that A if I didn't do the work, if I didn't do the assignments, if I was late every time, and it definitely didn't say anything. And so ultimately, that A reflects how much I did. As far as how much time I spent on each week on the class, I probably spent about like 2-3 hours because the reading did definitely take most of the time, and so, and there wasn't like a way I could, speed that up because, even with the 3 jobs and all that jazz, I still was able to delegate, more time. And could I have more? Could I spend more time on it? Yeah, but ultimately I got an A. So it looks like for me, my 3 hours was able to keep me in line, and so really, it was really my 3 jobs that kept me from spending more time. And again, which also ties into class discussions. That's why I really like those because you really can assess what you're doing. And as far as did I discuss the course with it? Yes, I did, and I mostly did that um, because, like again, as I said, I like having conversations about things in the world, which again will tie into socialization and actually having a conversation, which is actions. And so ultimately, it's those conversations that to me just make me more and more interested about, okay, what are we going to learn next? What's going on? What's happening here? And did I use the office hours? No. No, I didn't. It's a shame. I really should have. I'm sorry. However, I did, as you know, I have emailed you anytime a problem has occurred because obviously technology does not want to work with me, and so to me, it is done quite well in this case. I'm quite proud of that, and I personally think you um you responded to me in a wonderful manner. I know that you have a lot of emails to answer, so I'm not even going to say you didn't answer in a timely manner because you do. Um, Even if it's like the next day or something. I understand what you go through, so I'm not even gonna really harp on that because I just send you an email and you respond to it. So it would be different if you didn't. Now, do I feel confident in the knowledge of what I have learned throughout this course? Yes, I do, because those just the reading and the text and the lectures ultimately provided me with so much knowledge so far that I like no, if somebody comes up to me and asks me something, be like, hey, why is racism here? Why is it here? I can tell them, be like, well, it's here because white elitists wanted to keep power. It is a social construct, and they created it for a reason. It was not supposed to be here. It wasn't there. It was created to separate folks. And so ultimately, all of everything that I've learned makes me really, really confident. And like somebody asks me something, I know it. And as far as anything that motivated me to become more active more politically, yes. Okay. When we were talking about um socialization in like chapter 4, especially Congress in chapter 8, um, that one really resonated with me, mostly because I I think it would be really kind of cool to make laws because I seems to me that I'm quite passionate about about politics, because it's like politics affects me, affects everybody. And so I personally think that I'm going to wind up taking um, political science as my major partly because of this class. And so ultimately, what I have learned really has reinforced, and really enforced my political activity, and I absolutely love it. As far as my general feelings of how I feel at the end of this course, it's a shame. I kind of wish we were talking about um, more more things. I think, if I'm correct, I think this is the beginning, because I know there's also some classes that probably talk about like race is one thing, like African American studies, something like that. Then there's probably another one that talks about sexuality, and there's probably another one that talks about women. So all those classes are their own, but I feel as though, like at the end of this course, I am quite well off, because honestly, at the beginning, I was very excited from being honest. I was like, okay, this is really cool. I'm gonna learn a whole bunch of stuff, so that way I'll be ready. Okay, so now I've learned all that, and now I'm like, okay, I'm ready, and now I want to learn more. I want to learn more. I need to know more. I need to know the history. History is the most important thing one can know, so that way you do not repeat the same mistakes. And so, is there anything that I would like to add? No, no. I think this class was very well structured, and I absolutely, truly, absolutely loved it. And like I said, I it was structured well. We knew what we had to do. We knew when we had to do it. We It was definitely engaging for me. Like I said, for me, I like to talk, and so I really have no complaints. Like I said, the only thing I would say that I would add is that I like the fact that you did um your videos outside a couple times. You always did your videos in a different place, whether it was a room or outside. I really liked that, especially when it came to the lecture, and that you also have a soothing voice. You definitely could be like one of those narrators. So thanks for listening to this final. That about concludes it here, and yeah, so that's it. Hopefully, I have in-person chemistry class on Monday, so I'll probably see you then. I'll come meet you in person, I think. I'm not sure if you're actually online. But yeah, that concludes this final. Thanks for listening. Bye.